Good evening. Hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm Selena Anderson, Director of the Center for Literary Arts. On behalf of the board and staff, I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's reading with K-Ming Chang, best-selling author of Bestiary, Gods of Want, and Organ Meats. This event is made possible thanks to the continued support of the Martha Easley Cox Lecture and the Joyce Milligan Family Foundation. Tonight is a really special night. It marks the first event celebrating Organ Meats, and K-Ming is back home where it all began. In just a moment, K-Ming will read from her latest work, after which she will be interviewed by Amanda Mae Kim. And lastly, we'll take questions from the audience. If you have a question, and I'm sure you do, be sure to jot it down along with your name on the note card that's in your chair. At the end of the interview, the audience questions will be read on stage to the author. The end of the evening will conclude with a book sale and signing. K-Ming Chang is a Kundiman Fellow, a Lambda Literary Award winner, a National Book Foundation 5 under 35 honoree, and an O'Henry Prize winner. She is a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice novel Bestiary, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and the PEN Faulkner Award. In 2021, her chapbook Bonehouse was published by Bull City Press. Her most recent book is Gods of Want, which was a New York Times Notable Book of 2022. Her next books are a novel titled Organ Meats and a novella titled Cecilia. Please join me in welcoming K-Ming Chang.
Hi all. Ooh, it's so great to see you all. I'm really honored to be here. I'm very excited also this is the first time I'm celebrating the release of my book, which came out on Tuesday. So I'm a little bit terrified because I've been pretending it doesn't exist for the past 48 hours, but now it's real, it's here. No more pretending. So I'm gonna read a couple of really short flash fiction pieces. One of them, the first one is a horror story because I thought, Halloween is coming up. It's my favorite holiday. It's October for me year round, so I thought I would read that. And this story is inspired by, I oftentimes pull from urban legend and myth in my writing. And I remember when I was a kid, everyone was really fascinated by this urban legend of a woman who found a finger in her bowl of chili at Wendy's. And we understood no context for this whatsoever. We just heard this and we ran with it and we were kind of obsessed with it. But this is fictional, I should just say. But it's inspired by that. So it's called Finger. We hear on TV that if you find a finger in your bowl of chili at Wendy's, you can sue them and live on that money forever. We debate whose finger to sever, how we will split the money, but in the end, only one girl is willing. Gao Xiaocai, whose mother needs surgery to remove her spleen because it is hardening. What is the spleen, we ask Xiaocai, but she doesn't know either, can only make two fists and say this is inside her. We ask her which finger she wants to sacrifice, and she says her ring one, since she doesn't want to marry anyway. Her mother says men are worse than spleens because they can't be surgically removed from inside you. That's fine, we say, though we pity that finger, crying as we hold it down on her mother's cutting board and bring the cleaver down blunt. Though we tied a knot around her finger the night before, choking off the blood so it will turn dead and white as a radish, Xiaocai still screams, and we are still sorry when the cleaver doesn't go all the way through, just sort of lodges in the bone, and by the time we wrestle the blade up again, her bone flaking like snow, Xiaocai is unconscious and her mother is awake, chasing us out. Her finger is only severed part way, and now it has an extra hinge in it. And though we think she looks way cooler this way, like those ghosts with hands as long as their arms that can eat a tree with one fist, her mother is upset because now Xiaocai is unmarriageable. Xiaocai says she has to drink a bag of pig's blood every day because of blood loss, and because we are sorry, we buy her jumbo bags at the grocery store and watch her sip, her wrists bulging full, shattering her bracelets and scattering the bone beads we scramble to pluck off the street. We will find another thing to amputate, maybe a toe, because who needs those? Xiaocai says she has an uncle without toes, and maybe we can ask him for advice. He must live in a house beneath his own acre of sky, rain whenever he wants it, the sun dinging like a concierge bell, But Xiao Cai says no, this uncle lives in his Subaru. We tell her we don't believe that, but Xiao Cai brings us to the Burger King parking lot and asks him to show us his feet. It's true, he says, I lost my toes, but not inside a stew. During the war, I was sent to Qinghai to herd cattle, and all the women said, remember to sleep with your feet buried in coal. And I forgot, and my toes purpled like grapes and were plucked off clean by the cold. But I kept my teeth, he says, smiling, and they are turrets of gold. Every part of him is gilded, skin described by sweat, hands rubied with calluses. We tell him he should have kept all his toes in a plastic baggie and tucked them into a cheeseburger, and then he'd be so rich his bones would be re-released in gold. And he laughs and says they burned his toes, converted them to coals. We ask if he has collected them back yet. No, he says, and asks us why we want them. We say we're going to spoon them to our mouths and scream and sue, and then we will pay to evict Xiao Cai's mother's spleen, and we will buy pink houses that look like sliced cake, and holographic skirts, and a new Subaru that can go underwater like a submarine and resurface him anywhere he wants. He laughs again. He says, does a finger cost so much here? When I was little, he says, little girls didn't roam the streets looking for cold toes, didn't hijack cleavers either. What do they do then, we ask, and he says they used to fly kites. Kites with faces on them to scare ghosts away, kites with our faces. Back then, he tells us, he had a sister just like us, except one time she got her kite tangled in a power line, and when she tried to tug it down, she got electrocuted. They tried to take her home, but no one could touch her without snagging themselves in her light, and by the time she stopped shaking, she was dead. We had to carry her home without touching her, muffled in wool, he says. How much money did you get, we ask, for her whole body like that? We think it must be a lot, but he turns away from us, putting his hands on the wheel even though we are going nowhere. Nothing, he says, nothing. That's when Xiao Cai gets the idea to dig up a dead body and steal the fingers off that, and this way none of our blood has to be replaced with the pig's. We agree, and all week we dig beneath power lines for electrocuted girls, but we only find soda cans, pigeon bones, gravel. Xiao Cai's mother's belly turns green because the spleen is now a honeydew melon, and though Xiao Cai begs us to finish severing her finger, we see the way it hinges, knuckling like a tree beneath another country's wind, and we cannot fell it. Xiao Cai's uncle follows us in his car as we walk to the grocery store for pig's blood, as we plot which bodies to rob, always our own. He scrolls down his window. His car stalls behind us, shuddering still, and the window breathes steam. Freeze, he says. You'll freeze. He runs out toward us, kneeling, taking each of our feet one at a time and cupping them in his palms, buttering us in his breath, and we ask him to go back in the car. Aren't you cold out here? Don't spend all your blood on us. But he kneels, holding our feet to his lips like a microphone, saying again and again, someday you will be worth more than this. You will be worth more than what you've lost. Thank you. And the next two stories, one of them is only a paragraph long, but they're both based on things that I've misread, because sometimes I'll misread things, and the misreading is more interesting to me than what's actually on the sign. And I was driving, and I saw this sign for a strip mall, and I thought the laundromat was called Life Cycles, and I got so excited, because I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if you could reincarnate yourself at a laundromat? You know, you just get in the washing machine, move on to your next life, get out, brand new. Like, I was so excited. And then I kind of doubled back and was like, that's not what it said. But I decided I had to run with this idea and try to write. So this is called Life Cycles. With the paycheck from her new job, my mother buys a washing machine. She straps the box to the top of our car and escorts it home like royalty. But Amma refuses to use it, says the machine wastes water. In truth, she wants to keep going to the 24-hour laundromat on our street, the one with windows so big and clear, everything inside is whitened by the soap of sunlight. It's where you go to be reborn. After slotting your quarters into the machine, you choose your cycle and crawl inside. There's the delicate cycle for souls that are easily torn and must be massaged into their new forms. The power wash cycle for those whose sins are particularly stubborn stains. And the quick wash, which swallows all the rest of us. My mother says we're strapped to a cosmic wheel, and you can't just press a start button and expect to escape suffering. But Amma takes me on Sundays, and we run through the aisles laughing, flinging open the doors to every machine, witnessing rebirth. A crow gushing out like ink, a doe climbing out on wobbly legs, an octopus blended into jelly. Amma never launders her own life. Only our clothes go into the machine, never our bodies. It's better to accept your little in life, she says. I correct her. You mean your lot in life. One time, I yank open a door and a slug slithers out. Amma whispers to me that it's Lai Ayi who is already on her 1,873rd life. She sold her house and her car and her kidneys just to fund her reincarnations. Now she lives in a metallic palace of coins, and every day she feeds a fistful to the machine and stuffs herself inside. So far, she's crawled out as every species of reptile, a battered bride, and a giraffe thigh. The rest of the body got stuck inside. Still, she's unsatisfied. Last week, when she was a golden-crowned sparrow, the closest that woman will ever get to royalty, Amma says, Lai Ayi fluttered to the laundromat with quarters in her beak, so eager to reincarnate that she slammed into the window and had to be revived by pedestrians. Amma shakes her head and says, some women are so terrified of repeating the same life, they'll run to anything else. Our family is the same way. My mother says she'll kill herself before she ages into a burden like Amma, and Amma says she'll grow nice and old and wise instead of jumping off a building like her mother did. Both of them worry I will copy their crimes, adding to the debts we've accrued in our past lives. The cousin kidnapped by her husband, the country that flooded, the aunt with the bean in her breast. Every tragedy is currency, a down payment on our bodies, and the job of a daughter is to be the one responsible. I asked my mother if I can quit this job, and she says to stop going to the laundromat. It's a gutter of guilt. But at night, when I see her kneeling in front of the shrine, I know she believes we've committed horrors before we were born. Because we'll never pay back our days, we have no exit. Instead of emerging into air, we paddle in the opposite direction, burying ourselves deeper inside our mothers. We grow into them like clothes, wearing all we owe. I imagine my mother inside a washing machine, trapped behind glass, churned in circles until her face erases itself like a stain. The next morning, I find out why she's been praying. In the kitchen, she tells Amma that she got fired. She's going to have to return the washing machine, and we better pray it's not too late. It's always too late, Amma says. That day, I walked to the laundromat alone. In the doorway is a little bird with blue-gray wings, a coin in its beak like a newly minted moon. Its wings whir, blurring into a bruise. It's Lai Ayi begging me to kill her now, to swat her down like a fly. She says, nearly 2,000 reincarnation cycles, and I end up a damn barn swallow. What's wrong with being a barn swallow, I ask. Don't you know, she says, barn swallows only have a 5% survival rate in the first year of their lives. Starvation and predators, adulthood is improbable. What I wanted, Lai Ayi says, is to be a protected species, one of those animals on a special list that says, you cannot hunt, eat, or capture these. They are precious. They are few. But barn swallows are ordinary, everywhere, Lai Ayi says. At dusk, when I was a human, they swarmed the tree in my backyard, dicing the air as nimbly as knives, chasing tiny insects only they could see. And though they were graceful, all I saw were their ghosts, the 95% who hadn't survived, the ones who should have been, the inheritors of our air, every tree yearning out of the dirt to earn a crown of their bodies. I hold out my empty hands and Lai Ayi flits into my palms. I cup her to my chest and walk up to a machine. When the door swings open, I climb in. Lai Ayi's wings beat against my breast, and as the drum floods with water, I feel her heart slowing, sinking with mine. We shut our eyes. We feel the water rise and rasp in our throat. Outside, I hear Amma's voice calling to us, her hands outstretched to receive our body clean. Lai Ayi's soul makes a nest in my chest, and the cyclone of water swallows us together. We batter the glass until it cracks. I expand, my arms branching out like a tree's, puncturing the walls of the drum, lancing it with leaks. Soon the water will lash out of the holes, emptying the machine. In the depths of my chest, Blai repeats, soon, soon. This cycle is ending. Thank you. Okay. Speaking of water, I'm just gonna take a sip. And then I have just two very, very brief things. So this next one is also based on something that I misread. I will scroll through my feed really fast, and I saw this Scientific American headline, and I thought it said, all whales exhibiting signs of lesbianism. And I got so excited, and I was like, I had to scroll up to find it. I was like, gotta find it. And that was not the headline. It was just words blurring together. But as soon as I misread that, I was like, oh, I have to write about these lesbian whales. So this is just a paragraph. Extinction. The headlines that summer, all whales exhibiting signs of lesbianism. Scientists worldwide were distressed by the possible extinction of whales and tried all different ways to inseminate them. By injection of sperm, by introducing mates into their territory, which frequently resulted in lethal fights, by releasing medicine into the ocean with a syringe the size of a submarine, by training members of the human species to learn whale song and impersonate suitors, by introducing inflatable whale-sized dildos to entice them, by ladling whales out of the ocean and into tanks so that they could be more closely studied, by performing surgeries, unspooling their intestines like lengths of ribbon, securing brain and bone samples, asking animal psychologists to question why. Why now? Are they suicidal? Do they no longer care about the continuation of their species? Have they inherited the human quality of selfishness? Do they have a language for loneliness, singing and giving birth alone for so many millennia? Are they like the animals that return to die in the same place they give birth? What do they do with their umbilical cords? Do they knot the cords into nooses or bury them on the seafloor or eat them raw like eels? Did they surface to breathe or to watch us? Do they know the concept of drowning? Do they think the sea is as endless as we do, the depths we have never touched with our tongues? Then we wonder about the dark. We wonder what it means to live inside it, in a place where light goes extinct. What do whales drink? Does thirst exist in their vocabulary? Does desire? Thank you. Okay. And very last thing, and then I guess I'm also talking. I was about to say I'll stop talking, but it will be a different kind of talking. It's an excerpt from Organ Meats, which is, I've been calling it my feral girl fall novel. It is my kind of attempt at the horror genre. So again, kind of bringing it back to Halloween. And I'll just read a very, very brief section. So throughout the book, there are these organ histories where the girls kind of fabricate, they're not biologists by any means, but they're like fabricating the origins of organs. And this is the history of our bellies. Dear Rainey, as a girl, my Abu was a grief eater. Your mother doesn't want you to eat processed foods and even gave us that lecture about how McDonald's uses embalming fluids in all their products, which only made me want to eat more of their meat. Would my organs get pickled after eating? And when I was buried, would my belly knock against the underside of the soil like a balloon against a ceiling? Would my liver immortalize into light? But my Abu ate grief, processed or not. This was before she became my mother. Our mothers before us, they were miraculous. In Abu's particular building, when someone died, families hired grief eaters to enter the deceased person's abode and eat everything they owned. That way, the dead person's belongings could be reincarnated too, carried in Abu's belly and rebirthed through her intestines. Grief eaters are always women, Abu says. I've eaten everything. Belts, clothes, dishes, knives. Furniture takes a while, she says. It wears down your teeth. That's why mine are silver-capped. I've eaten cats, snakes, fish tanks, bed frames, mattresses too. I've eaten every species of shoe. I've eaten clocks, watches. I went to bed with my belly ticking. I could tell the time without even looking at anything. Something was counting the hours inside me. To audition for grief eating, Abu had to walk to a place of worship located on the scalp of a mountain and sit in a room damp as the inside of a mouth and wait for monks to bring her an assortment of objects on wooden trays. She had to eat each object in the dark and defecate into a copper tray that was located in the corner, gleaming red-black like a picked open scab. The room was empty except for a cushion to kneel on and a teacup of water that carried her reflection. Abu was first brought a glass frog the size of her fist, which she swallowed whole to prevent shards in her throat. For a month before, she trained herself to swallow her own fist by first probing her throat with her pinky, then with her forefinger, and then her thumb, until at last she was able to wedge her entire fist inside without even bulging her neck. After she swallowed the frog made of glass, the monks brought her a tray of matchsticks as long as her arms, and so sensitive to friction that they could be lit by breathing on them. Abu knew they were testing to see if she could swallow them without striking their heads and setting her throat alight. So she broke the sticks apart in her hands and mixed them into the teacup of water until it was a dust-thickened porridge. Then she drank. Her intestines were silt-lined rivers. Thank you, and that's the end of that excerpt. I think now I'll just sit, yeah. Whichever you see. Okay, I'll take this one. Sorry.
we could switch.
Yeah, musical chairs, yeah.
Hi, wow, what a great crowd. It's such an honor to be here with you and to hear organ mates. So let's start off with the question about that. So you've written poetry, novels, short stories, you've got a novella in the works. Tell us a little bit how the second novel came about for you.
Yeah, so I call Organ Meets the kind of end of a mythic triptych, though as I was recently texting my agent, she was like, it's maybe the fecal triptych or the fecal trio, because that's also kind of a uniting theme is like myth, and then also for some reason feces kind of figures in all three of these books. But yeah, this book, it came about really in, I was doing this research into, my friend had this dog basically who was descended kind of mixed breed with Formosan mountain dogs. And when I was doing research into the Formosan mountain dog, the first link that I clicked on was like, Formosan mountain dogs are a wild dog. They're not really domesticated, so they're not officially recognized on the registry of dog breeds. And I was really fascinated by that. I think the idea of a wild dog was kind of an oxymoron, because I was like, wouldn't that just be a wolf? There are no more wild dogs. Dog means domesticated. That's such a contradiction to me. And so I was really fascinated and kind of dug into the history of these dogs. They used to hunt with indigenous warriors, and then they were kind of abandoned in the cities, and they had kind of cobbled together their own history, their own bloodlines. And I was interested in writing about these two girls who were descended from those dogs and who were similarly, I think, cobbling together their lineages and choosing ancestry within each other. Even though they're technically both of the same generation and the same age, I think they find a sense of origin within each other.
That's amazing. That's so great. And so this is what they sometimes call like the Taiwanese street dog. Is that the one?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah, and
okay.
what was fascinating about encountering this Taiwanese street dog.
Other name, right?
Yeah,
you know how there's
yeah.
a nice name and a not so
Yeah,
nice name.
exactly.
For everything.
Was that it was terrified of every sound, like even things like your arm brushing against a chair, forget about fireworks or any kind of loud sounds. And I was really interested. I'm like, oh, what kind of ancestral memory does this dog have access to? And I was just really fascinated in that kind of skittishness that people say is like inherent to the species or inherent to that breed. And I'm really interested in the idea of what kind of memories do you inherit, and bodily knowledge as well. Like, what are things that your body knows or remembers that maybe your more kind of conscious, rational self might not?
Yeah, great. Oh my gosh. Your work is so focused on the body and what we experience through our senses, and smells and taste and touch and slimy things and silky things, and also about that bodily trauma too. And so I think that's an amazing thing that you do. You let us really live fully through our senses in a way that we don't always. And how did you arrive at that? Like that way of kind of sharing the world?
Yeah, I always thought, oh, maybe it's just a thematic thing. I'm interested in the body in this like kind of thematic, abstract way. But I think part of it is also realizing that my pleasure in writing is more sensual than I thought. I feel like we typically think of writing as this very intellectual process and bodiless process. And in some ways it is, because I do find that I leave myself when I'm writing. You know, people always like, in the flow state, you know, you forget to drink, you forget to eat, you forget to go to the bathroom. And I do experience those things that feel almost like a form of transcendence when writing. But on the other hand, what keeps me grounded and excited on the page is this very sensual connection with language and the feeling of like the pleasure of the words and the sounds that they make. And feeling like language is this material, this malleable material that I can play with, and that can be joyful and surprising. And that to me, that's very sensual in a way. And I think also thinking about like the sonic quality of the language is also, you know, very sensory. So I think there's more of my body in the process than even I am aware of or know about. Yeah.
I think that's really true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we lead most of our lives through our senses, our five senses, right?
Yeah.
And very little up here.
Yeah.
And so do you think that that is connected in some way to the vibrancy of your language? Or?
Yeah, I was talking about this earlier as well, but I feel like I'm very much a maximalist, and I love to kind of accumulate clutter and think about it's almost like this trash heap or like this landfill of language. And to me, there is something really exciting and vivid about that. It's almost like being overwhelmed where you're not even quite sure where to look. And I try to think of every landscape or every sentence as a landscape that I'm populating. And sometimes, again, it's messy and it lacks meaning, and I have to go back and kind of finesse. But it also, I think, leads me to these very kind of sensory, vivid places that are really unexpected. It's kind of like, you know, opening floodgates. I try to think about that when I'm drafting, so that I'm not constantly like self-censoring or being, you know, really overly critical of what I'm putting on the page. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about censoring actually, and about permission, because what you're describing is a lot of inputs, right? And there's a lot that comes out on the page, and it's not always linear. So then how do you, and as you're producing this and it's coming out from a bodily place, how do you like let it flow or channel, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I love to cite the poet Victoria Chang, she was citing another poet, and she talks about language first, then ideas. And I love that form of playfulness where before I can even quite form what the ideas are or what thematically I'm reaching toward or even what I want to say, because I feel like I arrive to the page not knowing what I want to say. I'm like, oh, I don't know. And the language in some ways it's almost smarter than me or more curious than I am and can break past, you know, places of shame or fear or anxiety in ways that I think my other mind, conscious mind, would really try to control or wrangle. So I try to trust in that language first. And even if it takes me down all these kind of false paths, which it does often, I try to kind of take joy in that process as well. So even making the drafting process, I mean, this is difficult for me on a day-to-day basis, but trying not to make the drafting process too linear for myself. This idea of like, okay, write something from beginning to end, kind of plow through it. But again, thinking of that more kind of horizontal landscape, just letting all of letting the world be populated and kind of thinking about it as I'm creating a world or creating a horizon of some kind, rather than thinking like, oh, I have to, you know, ride this linear journey and like tunnel into it, which I find more intimidating. So I think it really is just about what is the best way to kind of trick yourself in some ways and like lull yourself into that state. Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think it's probably really inspirational for people who are, you know, emerging writers like myself, who are self-censoring or worried about that, that you have that trust and confidence. And I'm like, where does that come from again? Like, how do we tap into that?
Yeah, I think it's like a Borges quote that we all have like a public life, a private life, and a secret life. And I tried to let my writing be my secret life in a certain way, even though it's like the most public part of me, ironically, but it's like you have to, during the drafting process, at least for me, kind of pretend it's my secret life, where all the things I want to say but don't have an opportunity to say, or all of the things, it's almost like a dream journal, where all of these things that don't have a place in my day-to-day life, or aren't kind of acceptable in my day-to-day life, I try to then, again, it's like going to the landfill, but it goes into the writing, or the landfill of writing. I try to funnel that into the secret life, so it feels, so that the drafting and the writing itself feels like me. It feels like I'm returning to myself, yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing, because it's also this kind of becoming as well, it sounds like, too. So, and it's interesting to hear you describe Organ Meats as part of a triptych, too, like a 3-part series. So what are the other 2 parts in your mind? Is it the poetry, or is it the prose, or?
Yeah, so in my wildest dreams, I write like fantasy series where there are like, hundreds of books in the series. But the books are very much standalone books, but I feel like they come from a certain place in my life, or a certain aesthetic interest that feels very married to each other. And I almost visualize like Bestiary and Gods of Want, my first and second books. I almost imagine it like a hallway where those are 2 doors, and then Organ Meats is like the final door at the very end of the corridor, where it's like kind of the furthest extreme I could kind of push that style. And in some ways, when I was writing Bestiary, there was a part of me that was like, oh, this is a little too strange. This is a little too much. And same with Gods of Want, and I feel like that got funneled straight into Organ Meats, where all of it is strange and wild, and there's like none of the sanity left of the other 2 books. But in some ways, it's both terrifying, like it feels like a risk to present something that feels like the gristle of the other works that I've sawed off of them, and that also feels like the most pure form of that style that I was trying to accomplish with my first 2 books. So it's come with a lot of like conflicted, mixed feelings. But I think that's a good thing too. I think it's good to have, to embrace a sense of doubt or uncertainty in writing, or at least I tell myself that. I try to remind myself that can be a really good and interesting and generative thing. Yeah.
That's such a good tip. And it kind of reminds me that you also do a lot of teaching and instructing and workshop leading, and that you're very much a literary citizen, right, and helping others. So, I see all of that when you sit here and talk about this amazing work.
Oh, thank you.
So I was going to ask you then, I know you have a novella coming out as well. Do you want to share a little bit about the novella?
Yeah, so this novella, it was kind of this kismet dream, speaking, because this book it's about dreams, but this really was kind of a dream come true, in that Coffee House Press was creating this novella series, and they solicited me and reached out and said, oh, do you have anything that you're working on? Would you like to submit? And I'm not sure whether I actually was working on something, but I immediately was like, yes, I am. Absolutely, 100%, which it was so wonderful, I think, to kind of know that they would already be receptive to the work in some ways, or were already really interested in what I could possibly do with the form. And the kind of tagline that they gave me was like, something too weird for your publisher, which I love. Like, that was the exact assignment. They're like, something a little too strange that you can't find a place anywhere else. So really, it was kind of like, what is your oddest and most experimental or most challenging creature that you could come up with? And I ran with it. I was like, oh, I love that. At the time, I was reading a lot of novellas in translation that were very language forward, or were very kind of interested in story possibilities that kind of diverge maybe from more linear plots. And I ended up writing this book, Cecilia. It was also a dream of mine to write something where the title was just someone's name, because I very selfishly love that convention. I don't know the name of it, but I love it so much. And it actually began as a short story that I had written and was published in Hyphen magazine. but even after it was published, I kept going back to the link, which is a little embarrassing. Whoever runs the back end of that website just sees the same person, like 70 hits. Yeah, it's just me. And then it's just the author, which is even more embarrassing. Like, I can't even claim to have like a fanatic, someone who's like reading that story. And I realized it was because there was something like really deeply unresolved about that story for me, and that those stories had kind of lived outside of that story. And I was like, oh, I have to resurrect them. So it became the pair of girls that I ended up writing about. And then the second kind of inspiration was this tweet that my friend sent me that was like, oh, no one groomed me into being queer. I had a toxic homoerotic friendship like everyone else. And I thought that was so hilarious and so brilliant. And I realized in retrospect, as I was drafting, that was kind of what the book was about. Was about this like this shared collective experience of toxic homoerotic friendship. And I was like, oh, I feel like we also don't value those relationships or those friendships, or if they're included in a piece of media, like a book or a movie, it's always like the prelude to someone's then like kind of, heteronormative life. And I'm like, no, I want that to be the centerpiece. I want to kind of freeze that friendship and make it the most apocalyptically important relationship of that person's life, and in the like the scale of the universe. So that was my adventure into that.
That sounds amazing, totally mind blowing.
Thank you.
Apocalyptically, wait, what did you say?
Apocalyptically important relationship.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
I think that's how a lot of those early relationships are. I mean, it's inevitably apocalypse.
Yeah.
But also important. So I always, when I read your work, I sometimes wonder, like, did this start out as a poem? Did it start out as flash? Did it start out prose? Like, when you are coming up with these stories, like, or you read a tweet or something like that, does it feel to you like a novel? Feel like how does that resonate for you?
Yeah, I feel like I tend not to know what it is or what it'll become until I start writing, and I tend to just accumulate language, whether it's a poem or a short story or a novel, and then sometimes I'll have ideas of what this could become. I'm like, maybe this could be the next story, the next book, and it never is. It always subverts my expectations, which I have to then kind of learn to accept as I'm writing. But it always begins with just the accumulation of language, having fragments, sounds, metaphors, sometimes even just character names on a page will then, kind of cause something to erupt and come from the crevices of that. And no matter what form I'm writing in, it typically begins with that document of like very scattered pieces of language that I then try to, unravel or choose or pluck out.
Amazing. Out of the landfill.
Yeah, out of the landfill, exactly, the landfill. I actually recently read this story about how in the South Bay, the gulls, they're not seagulls because they're technically not at sea, which is something I learned from the birding community as well. So you're not allowed to call them seagulls if they're not at sea. But gulls will ride garbage trucks to get to the landfill. Then they'll like feast for hours and before flying home. And I just was kind of obsessed with the idea that they've kind of learned to hitch rides to the landfill. But now whenever I sit down to writing, I'm not kidding, I literally think of that image. I'm like, I'm hitching a ride on my garbage truck to go to my landfill, to feast on just like the detritus of my life and like the rotting excess of my life and the surplus that I'm just gonna pluck through. And I'm like, if the gulls can do it, I can do it too. Yeah.
I love that. I think this should be like a whole like how to write kind of graphic novel sort of thing.
Write like a goal.
Right, yeah. 50 ways.
Yeah.
I have a question too about, like, you were just talking about the excess, right, in our lives and in society, and I sometimes wonder about this sort of anti-capitalist thread that I sometimes perceive in your writing, and because there is a lot. I mean, fast food is in there a lot. The surplus that people are producing is there a lot, and how people get lost in that production too is one of the themes. And I'm wondering, like, do you feel like that is a theme, or am I making that up? And then also, like, how does that come through in your writing, or how are you trying to use that idea?
Yeah, I think both of the flash stories I read are especially about that, and like thinking, especially in the first one, about how desperately, they so desperately want, like they're willing to cut off their fingers in order to kind of survive capitalism, and are like destroying this thing that has worth in order to then exchange it, you know, for financial security. And so yeah, those themes are definitely really present. And I think about it a lot in terms of like kind of familiarization and defamiliarization, where I'm really interested in my work in defamiliarizing all of these systems that we consider natural. And Organ Meats is kind of hugely about that, like the ties between patriarchy and capitalism, and how the way that the two girls are kind of like conditioned in the book to be perfect daughters, or to be obedient, to be good in a certain way, is incredibly unnatural. But everyone else in their life, everyone else in the world sees it as natural. They think of it as almost like a trait that you would breed into a dog, for example, where it's like, why would you subvert the natural order in that way? And Cecilia, too, is also about kind of like wanting to destroy the idea of a natural order. And I think capitalism kind of asserts itself as a natural order. And so I try to think about like, what can I defamiliarize? What can I make strange? What kinds of violence can I expose as violence? Because I think a lot of times the characters in my books are kind of taught to tolerate violence or to tolerate suffering as just a natural condition of being. But it is incredibly unnatural, and their rage must be awoken. And so I'm like, yes, like set the fuse on and light it, and kind of allow that rage to guide them through the world. Yeah.
I definitely see that, and I also see how in many different ways you're kind of also saying that what we believe is a choice, and we're making choices all the time to believe this or that. And so I think your work is really deeply political and philosophical in many ways that I really appreciate. So
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. That means a lot to me. It means a lot to me.
Oh, I mean, it's also like there's also this gothic and gross and early stuff,
Yeah.
but I do see it as being really kind of archly political, and I don't hear that talked about very much. And so I'm wondering, like, what are some power dynamics or power structures that you're most fixated on?
Yeah, I think I'm most fixated on kind of like patriarchal messaging, conditioning that especially the daughters and the mothers and the women in this family kind of internalize for themselves, and the way in which like the matrilineage has been really degraded in the broader context of the family. So a lot of like Confucian patriarchal ideas of being kind of self-sacrificing or self-effacing, or that the way you earn goodness is by kind of annihilating the self in order to advance the goals or the desires of someone else. And that is kind of the ultimate idea of goodness. And so I think what I love so much about writing about girlhood friendships, and Anita and Rainey in this book specifically, is it's the one relationship in their life where they're allowed to be selfish, and where they ask each other, they kind of bring each other back to themselves, and the main question that they allow and make space for in each other is, what do you want? Which I feel like is so incredibly powerful, and I feel like I only recently started asking myself that question. And even then I was so resistant to that. I'm like, what do you mean, what do I want? Like, that feels so incredibly unnatural and wrong. And so I love that these two girls, when they're around each other, they're always, even if they're not blatantly asking each other that question, they make room and space for that questioning of like, what do I want? In ways that, that I feel very moved by and very moved toward. And it's kind of the same with my forthcoming novella as well. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
That's going to be a lot.
Oh, and I forgot to, I also wanted to say, like, and also in that I kind of containing a collective, like, I think throughout my work there are oftentimes themes of like deferred desire and generations of kind of accepting or deferring want, and what it means to, how asking yourself, what do I want, is in some ways like a form of communal and collective care as well, and that idea of caring for the self as caring for others, and how those two things are entwined. and how each of these girls, in some ways, feels tethered to an entire lineage of wants and desires, and the kind of unseen, or not even necessarily unseen, but this desire to kind of honor what was impossible before them. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's so great. Beautiful. How are we doing on time? I see the fingers moving, yeah. So I can see you.
Yeah.
So I think we have some questions from the audience coming up. And so,
Question, please write it down on the note card, and Cassie and I will come around and pick them up.
oh, there we go. It's kind of like a weird game show.
Yeah, it is. Oh, that's so fun.
The weird part?
Yeah.
The game show part.
Both.
Yeah, I really love your work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate them.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is a great one. It's nice and personal.
Ooh.
Well, it was, but it's not spicy, but maybe it is. We'll see.
I accept those too.
Okay. I could add some spice.
Yeah.
What pulled you back to the San Jose area? Does being here again affect what and how you write? Also, and this is a good question, also, how do kites have special significance to you? So it's like three questions. I actually have that question about the kites, so yes.
Oh yeah, I didn't notice. I read about kites too again today.
Yes, I love kites.
Yeah, what pulled me back to the San Jose area, definitely my family, though also my family is now like slowly moving to Southern California, so I'm like, or moving back because they're originally from there. But yeah, so a sense of home, a sense of, and it's funny because like Organ Meats is a book about return and it's about homecoming. So my journey was also, when I was writing this actually, I was drafting this while moving as well. So I was returning and homecoming while writing about return and homecoming, which was, oh, maybe that's why I was writing the book. I'm like, wow, what a coincidence. Can you believe that? That's so wild. And I'm like, oh, maybe I was just writing about my life. So this is a book about San Jose. It really is. Woo woo. And then, yeah, so that's the main thing, family and home. And then the question about kites. Yeah, I grew up with a lot of like people who are expert kite makers and like kite fighters. And I remember I had a cousin who was like, we were just like at a park where there were toddlers. And he was like, we gotta crush some glass and put some crushed glass on the string so you can cut someone else's kite off. And I'm like, they're 3, you know? Like, I don't think we should aggressively like cut like fight kites with this 3-year-old who's probably really happy about their kite. But I appreciated the, you know, the gusto, yeah, the drive to do that. And I'm also just really interested in flight and flying things, which is why birds and insects oftentimes feature in my writing as well. I'm really interested in how the sky and things that fly have access to this world that is our world, but it is an entirely different world. Like I can spend hours just brainstorming what it would be like to kind of live in the parallel world of the sky. That's really fascinating to me. But maybe also because I read that children's series about owls when I was a kid, and so maybe I'm a little bit too obsessed with living in the sky. Yeah.
And kites as well. And you have like a lot of thematic elements, and then you were just talking about these different doors and going down the hall and this layering effect. So you're kind of layering these symbolic components as well. So that's really cool. Okay, so here's another one. What did you study while you were a student at San Jose State, and what has stuck with you?
Yeah, so I was here for the summer that I was writing Bestiary, and another not coincidental connection at all, because I was taking an Asian American history class, I took a music class, and then I took a second Asian American history class. And also my professor is right here in the first row, Dr. Kwan, very exciting. And a lot of what I learned in this class actually trickled into Bestiary. Like Bestiary has a bunch of footnotes in the sections, and I was reading texts that had footnotes, so I kind of borrowed from that academic structure. And I was really fascinated by like footnotes containing subjectivity or like containing doubt or containing sources that might be a little contested or kind of how you get to see, it's like the meta story. It's the story behind the story. And so much of Bestiary, it's a story about stories and a story about storytelling. So it's like, rip that off. And then the other portion that was inspired by that class is like learning about coolie labor and learning about migration and thinking a lot about the sea and like migration paths, Asian American immigration, but also just like thinking more broadly about migration as well, and also like what the sea has historically meant to people. And that inspired this kind of like piracy chapter of the book, where it's about this Taiwanese man who basically, he finds refuge in the sea. And it's about queerness and origin and like indigeneity and all of those things, but I was just really fascinated by the idea of like, oh, what kind of violence does land contain? And is there a way to escape that? Is there a way to create a new world that's outside of that? And I think that that kind of pirate chapter was probing that a little bit, yeah.
Interesting. That does help, because I was wondering about that chapter.
Yeah. So there we go. San Jose State University, thank you.
All right, give it up, San Jose State.
And people tell me that's their favorite chapter of the whole book. They're like, that was the only time I had fun, was reading about the pirates. Yeah, and it is my favorite chapter of the book as well, but yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, a process question. How do you avoid inspiration overwhelm? And how do you calm your mind and keep focus?
Oh, I'm kind of going through a bit of inspiration overwhelm at the moment too. So I think it's oftentimes realizing that all of the ideas I'm having in a moment are actually one idea, and that really they're kind of just like planets in a solar system, or they're, we were talking about chemistry, like molecularly, they just have to, I don't know chemistry, so they're gonna, bond, unite, and kind of realizing that all the things I'm obsessing about maybe come from the same dream world. So I try to think of a book as, it's almost like this archive of who you are at that time, and all of the various disparate elements, like letting my life into the writing, it all has a place, even if they might seem disconnected. So if I find myself pulled in many, many different directions, I'll kind of just let myself go toward what's making me most excited, like using joy and pleasure and following that as a guiding principle, and then have trust that all the other things that I've quote unquote abandoned will actually end up finding a way into the writing, even if indirectly, or maybe to a future self down the line. Those other elements will kind of resurrect themselves. Yeah.
I can see that. I can see how that would work. I hope that was helpful to the person who had this question.
Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
It was? Okay.
Yay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I mean, these are really good questions. But I have to ask this one because it's teeth, 4 exclamation points.
Yes, we were just talking about teeth, and I was saying that this whole conversation should be about teeth.
I know, so we have to ask the teeth question. Okay, they are in so many of your short stories and elsewhere. Why are they in so many stories, and what do they mean to you?
Yeah, here's where I reveal the entirety of my dental history, because it is wild. So firstly, my mom always likes to joke. She's like, your teeth are the most expensive part of your body, so you better keep those things like healthy and clean, like, I'm watching you. And so that is something I've internalized as well. But I've had very like strange tooth experiences where like when I was a kid, I had like acidic spit that rotted all my teeth. And I like lied to people and said it was like an X-Men like power that I could spit at things and they would dissolve. And I feel like that was one of the first times I was like, oh, strangeness can be powerful. And I'm really excited by that. And so teeth were always, and tooth pain was just always very present for me. I did grow out of it, so I'm no longer a weaponized tooth, like mouth. And I think also like teeth as kind of class status as well. Teeth as being very, it's kind of like a form of human remains, or like that we kind of carry in our mouths. I recently learned that you can actually buy and sell teeth because they're not considered human remains. So it's like legal to do that, whereas like, bones and actual remains are not, or are considered remains. And I was like, it's kind of strange that teeth, have are an exception, and you can actually buy and sell. They are this product of ourselves that I find really interesting and strange. And then also thinking about like metaphors of consumption, hunger, teeth as oftentimes a form of like monstrosity. You know, vampires have their teeth, werewolves have their teeth. Like ideas of like what a predator is usually is very tied to the teeth. So thematically, I'm really fascinated in teeth as these very strange, animated, monstrous parts of ourselves that maybe can reveal desire and hunger and want. Yeah.
Yeah. Also this idea of this currency of teeth, like buying and trading teeth. Who's doing that? Do you know?
Well, you can buy teeth. Don't ask me how I know that, but I know that you can. Yeah, and like animal teeth as well, like you can buy and sell animal teeth. But yeah, I think, but just as an image and as a motif, I think they're so thematically resonant with so many of the themes that I'm interested in. Yeah.
I think that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
You can get your way through that land. Those teeth, really big ones.
Exactly, yeah.
Any other questions that anyone wants to ask from the audience? Is there one more? I do have one more here. Well, they're kind of similar, so I'm going to try to fuse them. It's about what is your kind of relationship to yourself in your writing, so that you get at a fictional truth either through genre or through the practice of writing, or how do you mine or get to reveal or uncover or connect with yourself through writing, particularly fiction, right?
I feel like writing is it's this space of possibility and this space of transformation. And I think about this too, like in the context of dreams in this book as well. I think I so wanted to write a book about dreams, which this book is in part about, because it's a way of getting to explore and be adventurous and transform infinitely without ever risking your actual physical body in dreams. So I feel like writing is kind of the same way, where like the girls in the book, they often talk about imagination as a form of work or as a form of power that no one can take away from them because it belongs purely to themselves. Kind of everything else in their lives can be taken away or stripped from them at any point, but their imagination, their fantasies are kind of as ingrained in them as their organs, and is this incredibly powerful wellspring and source that can never ever be kind of torn away from them. And there's so much power in embracing that kind of endless interiority and learning to value that interiority as well, especially when they're kind of like fighting to kind of have that imagination be preserved or be valued in some way. Yeah, but I love that question because it is true that in some ways, like, your relationship to your writing does feel like a relationship to yourself or to that secret self, like I said. So I tried to kind of remind myself and take refuge in the fact that, even amidst so much futility, this is kind of the one thing that will always be mine, and that I can always foster or nurture or return. Speaking of return, it's like the place I can go home to, which I feel like for the girls in this book, imagination is their home. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing this work, and it sounds amazing. I cannot wait to read it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, K-Ming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for such lovely questions. They were such beautiful questions.
Really
Yeah.
good questions.
Okay, thank you. We have books for sale over here. Please line up for some books. Thank y'all for coming out tonight.
Thank you.